It's the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, and today I'm pleased to have the man, the myth, the legend, Michale Graves. How you doing today, Michael?
Good.
Good to see you. I mean, what's it been, 20 years?
It's been a long time. It's been 20 years.
When you look at those videos, those interviews,
Yeah.
it's like, that just seems like I was there yesterday. How do you deal with that?
Whew, boy, 20 years, right? I deal with it by celebrating it and saying, all right, I've come from 20 years of music and all of these things, and for better or for worse, it's prepared me for the challenges and the things that I face and that I deal with, in the present. It's surreal. It really is. I'm like the Forrest Gump of music. My life has been amazing. I deal with it by keeping my feet firmly planted on the ground. I keep God first place, and I work as hard as I possibly can, knowing that my main objective in this life now is to take care of my children and provide a life and an example for them that will give them the best shot at this life.
Now, what was your youth like growing up in Dumont, New Jersey?
My father was a police officer. He's a retired police officer now. My mom raised me and my brother and my two sisters up to the time I was about 7 or 8, and she went back to work. I lived in a lower to middle class suburban neighborhood. I went to a real small high school. I loved art. I loved music. That's all I wanted to do. My life was pretty normal.
At what age did you become aware of your singing talents?
When I was very, very young, the first thing I wanted to do was, I felt I had a calling to be a priest or a preacher, a man of God. And I felt that was my calling. When I was about 6 or 7, I really started to, anytime there was music on, my mom played music. She always had a radio on, and I lived with my uncle as well. Grew up in a house with my uncle, who was my mom's youngest brother. And so he always had rock and roll records playing. And I found that when I listened to music, I felt it inside me. There was just this, I just had this profound experience when I was listening to music. And so I began to really listen to music intently, and I found an old guitar in my brother's closet that was my uncle's, and I started to play, and all of a sudden the dream in my heart and the calling in my soul was different, and I knew that I was a music man.
What were some of the records?
I've never been a cliquey person, so I've loved all different kinds of music. My father, again, was a military man. He spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico, so I remember hanging out with my dad in the garage, and he would play all sorts of different Latin music, and he listened to like Barbra Streisand and stuff. My mom always had 770 AM WABC in New York on, and they played just the pop music that was on. So it was like, we would listen to Barry Manilow and Eddie Rabbitt. But my brother and my uncle, my brother who was older, and obviously my uncle was older, they would listen to like Ozzy Osbourne, the Rolling Stones, Don McLean, John Denver. I remember Ozzy Osbourne and AC/DC, U2, Def Leppard, Daryl Hall and John Oates. Yeah. All of that. I just loved all of it. I loved all of it, and I just devoured it all.
Were you around for the anti-rock seminars of the 80s?
I remember it clearly because my brother was older, and he had the Ozzy Osbourne records and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Twisted Sister, Motley Crue. I remember all of that. Again, and my dad was a cop, and my mom was a very religious woman as well, and so I remember her freaking out that we were listening to this music, and I remember it all. None of these bands, whether it's Ozzy Osbourne or Motley Crue or any of those bands, were actually embarking on a life of Satanism or the left-hand path, if you will. But my take on it now is that, again, in my relationship with God and Christ is solid. God sends people like myself, believers, into dark places to bring the light, to help people. I have no problems with with archetypes. I have no problems with allegories. I believe that you need to understand the darkness in order to understand the light. And again, it's entertainment. There's certainly examples of true Satanism and Luciferian tendencies and ideology within music, but with what I'm doing and rock and metal in general, I think that I know that it's far and few between.
What was your original motivation for wanting to be on stage, and how has it changed over the years?
Again, I can't say that I'm a saint, so that, there's a little bit of ego in wanting to be on the stage and to perform and show people what can come out of a performer. But really, I think it's, at the end of the day, it boils down to a sense of purpose and a sense of mission and duty, because I'm getting myself through this life. I perform and I write for myself as well because it's therapy, and I'm searching for the answers as well. But in that, my duty and my mission is to reach out to my audience and be that light and be that vehicle for them, knowing that my music and these songs that I create get into my soul and animate my flesh, but also other people's. It binds to their heart and their soul, and profoundly, and becomes a part of their life and their journey. And that's mega big. I remember again in the 80s when all the rock bands went over to Russia after the wall came down and the Soviet Union had fell. And I remember watching rock and roll music can truly save the world. And I still believe that. And so I do this for myself, and I do it to serve. Again, we're in the entertainment industry, music, movies, films, right? It has ego and narcissism and all the dark toolbox. It's all there. It's which again makes this thing that we do that much more special, because here we are working with sound. We're working with energy and visual things that get into our hearts and souls and animate our flesh. That's powerful, powerful stuff. There's definitely, obviously, a dark element to it. But I believe that there's folks like me that look at it differently and are part of and leading a revolution, if you will, a renaissance in art and music going forward.
How did your band, the Mopes, form, and what did you learn from that experience?
The Mopes formed when I used to spend the summers in the Catskill Mountains in New York State. My family was vacationing in the Irish Mountains and the Catskills before I was born. So we continued that tradition as I was young. I got a job at one of the resorts that we would frequent and have our family gatherings. Fell in love with the place. My soul just is at ease there for whatever reasons. When I was about 18, a good friend of mine was killed up there, and so I never went back. And that was the summer that I joined the band called Mopes. A friend of mine was in the band. I was looking to do something musical. I joined that band, and that was also by not going back and joining that band and working on the demos when I ran into the Misfits.
How did you come to join the Misfits, and was it the Peter Steele Typo Negative story or the Bob Aleka story?
Well, it's kind of both. I didn't go back to work up in the Catskill Mountains that summer. I was in the band called Mopes. I was working full-time for a tree surgeon. I was doing tree work. Cool. Again, in my life, I've had people, a friend of mine when I was younger, a friend of mine's husband said, listen, you're going to get into this whole music thing. You're probably not going to make a lot of money for a while. You got to be able to take care of yourself. He worked for a tree company. He taught me how to climb, do rope work, the whole nine. So I got a job doing that. And the Mopes needed to make a demo. We needed to make a record. So someone said to me, go in the music paper, find the biggest ad in the back, because they're probably the ones you want to go with because they're spending the most on advertising. So I picked out Bobby Aleka's studio called Real Platinum in Lodi, New Jersey. I went in there, the band was working, and I was doing vocals, And Bobby says to me one day, there's this band called the Misfits, and they're getting back together. They're working in the studio here. I've known them since they were kids. Why don't you give them a call and set up a audition? You might do well. And so I did. I got in touch with Jerry. I learned a bunch of Misfits stuff, and I went and I auditioned. And then I went back and I auditioned. And I kept on going back. For a good, at least it was about a year, they were always on the fence because I was nobody. I was just some random kid from Dumont, New Jersey that had some talent. And so as Halloween was approaching, the Misfits had to make a decision. Are we going to come back on Halloween, or are we going to wait another year? Misfits can't come back November 15th. They're the Misfits. So Ken Creedy, who was managing Life of Agony, Typo Negative, all the hardcore bands in New York City, got in touch with the Misfits and said, why don't you guys come out during Typo's encore set at Roseland this Halloween? They said, that's a great idea, but we don't have a singer. And they said, would Pete do it? Would Pete come out and sing it? So Pete said, yeah, of course, I'll come out, I'll sing the songs. But he didn't know any of the songs. So everybody called me, which was fine because I was a huge Typo Negative fan. Yeah. And they said, come teach Pete the songs. I said, great. We found ourselves in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm teaching Pete Steele and these songs with everybody, and he stops everything and says, this is ridiculous. I'm not singing these songs. This kid sings better than me, anybody else in this room. This is your singer. This is who needs to sing the songs. And then from there on out, I was pretty much the singer.
So how quickly did you start songwriting with Jerry Only, Doyle, and Dr. Chud after joining the Misfits?
It was a couple of months in. Once we really started rolling with the Resurrection tour and feeling comfortable with that effort, we knew that the next step in the process was going to be a new record. We knew that, and I knew that we wouldn't be a legitimate band unless we came out with new material that was relevant and hard-hitting, because that was the time the Sex Pistols were coming back, right? Punk, all the old punk bands were coming back, and it was sort of like these guys are coming back to cash in. And we didn't want to get caught up in that, saying, oh, the Misfits are just coming back to cash in. We wanted to be relevant. We wanted to, so in order to accomplish that, we needed a hard-hitting record with new music. So at least I started writing a couple of months in, getting prepared.
Jerry's reaction and Doyle's reaction when they heard some of your songs?
I think that they were surprised.
The Blaring Out Show.